Sergeant John Miller hadn't seen his K9, Max, in 10 years. But when he walks into the shelter, a familiar bark echoes through the room. Max, older and worn, stands frozen, eyes locking with John's. For a moment, neither moves, as if the years vanished. Then, Max takes a hesitant step forward. The once mighty K9, now weak, remembers. The bond they shared on the battlefield was never broken. Max limps toward John, and their reunion isn't just a moment, it's a miracle. But just when John reaches out to hug him, Max collapses, his legs giving out. Is it too late to save him? Watch until the end to find out. I never thought I'd see you again. Those words haunted Sergeant John Miller as he stared at the shelter door, his heart racing. 10 years. It had been 10 years since he last saw his K9, Max. The bond they shared on the battlefield was something unspoken, built on trust and loyalty, forged in the heat of combat. But when John was discharged, Max was sent off to another handler. The pain of that goodbye never truly left. As John walked into the shelter, he didn't expect anything to change. He didn't expect this place to hold the key to everything he'd been searching for. But then, a bark. Faint but familiar. His heart skipped a beat. He turned slowly, and there, standing in the middle of the room, was Max. The years had been kind to him, but not kind enough. His once proud, strong frame had aged, his coat more graying than black, but those amber eyes, they were the same. Max stood frozen, staring at John as though the years between them had never happened. Neither moved. The air was thick with emotion. Time seemed to slow. Then, Max's tail gave a hesitant wag. And with that, everything changed. The room seemed to close in, and John took a step forward. Max did the same. For a moment, they stood inches apart, as if the bond they shared had never been broken. John reached out, his hands trembling as he touched Max's head. Max leaned into the touch, his body slightly shaking, but his eyes locked on John's, full of recognition. It was then that John realized, this wasn't just a reunion. This was a miracle, a moment neither of them ever expected to happen again. But as John knelt down to hug his old friend, something strange happened. Max's body gave out. He collapsed to the ground, his legs unable to hold him up. John's heart dropped into his stomach. He wasn't ready for this. He couldn't lose Max again. Not like this. Not after everything they'd been through. Max, weak and shaking, struggled to get back up, but it was clear he was fading. The room seemed to spin around John as he gathered Max in his arms, cradling him gently. He could feel Max's breathing slow, his once strong heartbeat now faint and fragile. It hit John all at once, the reality of what was happening. Max had been through so much, and now, after all this time, was this where it ended? He couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not without trying. He looked down at Max, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm here, buddy. You're not alone," John whispered. But was it too late to save him? The clock was ticking. Time was running out. The next few moments would decide everything. John held Max close, praying that somehow, they'd have one more miracle together. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not yet. John cradled Max in his arms, heart racing, fear gripping him tightly. The old K9's breathing was shallow, each exhale a soft rasp. His once strong, loyal body had given in, his legs too weak to carry him any longer. John's hands trembled as he gently stroked Max's fur, trying to comfort the dog who had been his partner, his family. "Stay with me, Max. You've always been there for me. I'm not going to let you go now," John whispered, his voice cracking. Max's amber eyes flickered, as if struggling to stay focused, but the familiar spark of recognition never left. Time seemed to stretch, each passing second heavier than the last. John could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He'd fought in wars, faced dangers beyond measure, but nothing compared to this moment. He wasn't ready to lose Max, not now, not after all they had been through together. For years, he had wondered if he would ever see Max again. The thought of this reunion ending so soon was more than he could bear. He gently laid Max down on the cold, hard floor, his movements slow, deliberate, as though afraid to disturb the fragile moment between them. Max's breathing grew even more labored. John's eyes searched for a sign, anything, that his friend would pull through. He remembered the last time they were together on the battlefield, when Max had saved his life, when the bond between them had been sealed in a way that words could never describe. John had always promised to be there for Max, just as Max had been there for him. He wasn't about to break that promise now. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the edge of his phone. His hands were shaking, but he dialed anyway, his voice firm despite the fear. "Get me a vet." Now, he demanded. The line crackled, but the urgency in his voice must have gotten through. A vet on call was just 5 minutes away. John's eyes didn't leave Max's face as he spoke to the operator, his heart in his throat. He could feel the weight of those minutes stretching on, each one a lifetime. Max's eyes closed for a brief moment, and John's breath caught in his chest. "Don't you dare, Max," he muttered, desperation rising in his voice. He placed his hand gently on Max's chest, feeling the faint beat of his heart, willing it to stay strong. Max was more than a dog to him. He was family. A promise made in the heat of battle wasn't something that could be forgotten. The moments felt like hours, but finally, the door opened, and a woman in a white coat rushed in. The vet was here. She knelt beside Max, her hands quick but gentle as she assessed the situation. "He's not gone yet," she said, her voice calm and steady, but with an edge of urgency. "We'll do everything we can." John nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as the vet worked, his fingers still gripping Max's fur. Every movement, every breath, seemed to matter more now than it ever had before. This wasn't just about saving a dog, it was about saving his best friend. And he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not after everything. Max's body remained still on the floor, but John refused to believe it was too late. The vet worked tirelessly, her hands moving with precision as she attached and injecting fluids into Max's weak veins. John's heart raced as he knelt beside the dog, his fingers never leaving Max's fur. "Come on, Max, fight," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. The minutes dragged by like hours, each second feeling heavier than the last. John could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. How many times had Max saved him? How many times had they fought side by side, relying on each other for survival? John couldn't lose him now. He couldn't lose the one creature that had never given up on him. Max had been with him through every battle, every deployment, and every lonely night. They had shared a bond that words couldn't capture. Max had been more than just a dog. He was family. The vet worked quickly but carefully, her hands steady despite the urgency of the situation. She spoke quietly, almost to herself, as she checked Max's pulse. "His heart rate is weak, but it's still there. We're not giving up yet." John nodded, swallowing hard. His mind raced with memories of the past. He remembered the first day he met Max, the way the dog had looked at him with those intelligent, amber eyes. He had never seen a dog so loyal, so determined. And now, after all these years, he was here, willing Max to survive. The vet finally stepped back for a moment, her eyes meeting John's. "He's hanging on," she said softly. "But it's going to take more than just this. We need to get him to the hospital. He needs immediate care." John's chest tightened at the thought of Max being moved again, but he knew there was no time to waste. "Do what you have to do," he replied, his voice firm. The vet moved quickly, preparing Max for transport. John stood up, pacing the small room, his hands clenched into fists. He couldn't sit still, not with Max's life hanging in the balance. Every second felt like an eternity. As the vet prepared to leave, she turned to John. "We'll do everything we can. He's a fighter, just like you," she said, offering him a brief, reassuring smile. John couldn't find the words to respond. He just nodded, the fear and uncertainty still gripping him. The vet moved Max onto a stretcher, and John followed closely behind, his eyes never leaving the dog. They made their way to the ambulance, the sound of the sirens echoing in the night air. John's heart pounded in his chest as they rushed to the hospital, every mile feeling like a lifetime. "Stay with me, Max," John whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. He knew Max had always been there for him, always been the one to pull him through the darkest moments. Now, it was John's turn to be there for him. The ambulance finally pulled up to the emergency entrance of the hospital. The vet quickly wheeled Max inside, and John followed close behind. His mind raced, his thoughts a blur of fear and hope. Would Max make it through? Would they have their second chance, or would this be the end? He couldn't bear the thought of losing him. As the doors to the emergency room swung open, John's heart skipped a beat. He could only pray that they hadn't arrived too late. The hospital's sterile lights buzzed overhead as John paced the hallway, his boots echoing on the tile floor. His heart felt heavy in his chest, the weight of the past few hours pressing down on him. Max had been rushed into surgery the moment they arrived, the emergency room team working tirelessly to stabilize him. But the longer John stood there, the more the fear crept in. He didn't know how much time had passed. Every minute felt like a lifetime. "Please, Max," he whispered under his breath, the words barely a prayer. "Come back to me." He rubbed his hand over his face, his mind flooded with memories of their time together. He thought about the first mission they had shared, the way Max had saved him when everything seemed lost. How could he face a world without that loyal companion by his side? John had always been a soldier, always faced challenges head-on. But this was different. This wasn't a battle he could fight with strength alone. He needed Max. The doors to the surgical room opened, and a nurse stepped out. John stood up immediately, his breath catching in his throat. He began, his voice thick with emotion. The nurse nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "He's stable now," she said, her tone calm. "We've managed to stop the bleeding and get his vitals under control. He's not out of the woods yet, but he's a fighter. We'll keep him under observation for the next few hours, but for now he's doing okay." John felt a wave of relief wash over him, though the anxiety still lingered. "Can I see him?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The nurse nodded. "Just for a few minutes. We need to monitor him closely, but you can go in now." John followed the nurse down the corridor, his steps slow but purposeful. As they entered the room, his eyes immediately went to the bed where Max lay. The sight of his K9, so still and vulnerable, sent a pang of sadness through him. Max's once strong body was now hooked up to four and several machines, his breathing slow and steady, but fragile. John walked over to the side of the bed, his heart swelling with emotion. He gently placed his hand on Max's head, his fingers brushing through the dog's fur. Max's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Max's tail gave a weak wag. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough to bring a smile to John's face. "You're still with me," John whispered, his voice full of relief. Max's amber eyes met his, filled with a quiet recognition, as if the dog knew that he was safe. John sat down beside the bed, watching over Max, his hand never leaving the dog's fur. They had been through so much together, and he wasn't going to leave Max now. Not after everything they had endured. Hours passed, and John remained by his side, never once considering leaving. As the night wore on, Max's condition slowly improved. The machines beeped steadily, a sign that the K9 was gaining strength. John leaned back in the chair, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he couldn't tear himself away. He stayed by Max's side, knowing that his friend needed him, just as much as he had needed Max all those years. The bond between them was unbreakable, and no matter what happened, John knew that Max would always be there for him, just as he had always been. The night stretched on, but for the first time in what felt like forever, John allowed himself to rest, his hand still resting gently on Max's side, a promise made. Never again would they be separated. Days passed, and Max's recovery was slow, but there was undeniable progress. John sat by his side every day, refusing to leave, his eyes never straying far from the dog who had saved him countless times. The constant beeping of the machines had become a familiar sound, a sign that Max was fighting, that he was still there, still holding on. John's exhaustion started to catch up with him, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Each time Max's tail gave the smallest wag or his eyes flickered open, it felt like a victory. John had seen so much loss in his life, his friends, his comrades, the years of hardship. But this was different. Max was more than just a dog. He was the one constant in John's life, the one thing that had never given up on him. The bond they shared was something beyond words. The night Max finally opened his eyes fully, his body still weak, but his spirit undeniably present, John knew that he wasn't just sitting beside his dog. He was witnessing a miracle. Max's gaze met his, clear and steady, and for the first time since that fateful day, John allowed himself to smile. "You made it, buddy," John whispered, his voice full of emotion. Max let out a soft, almost inaudible whimper, his eyes never leaving John's. It was as if he was acknowledging everything. The years apart, the struggles, the pain. And now, in this moment, they were together again. Max had always been the strong one, the protector, but now, as he rested there in John's arms, John realized that it wasn't just Max who needed saving. He needed Max too. The vet had warned him that it would take time, that it wouldn't be an easy road to full recovery, but John didn't care. As long as Max was with him, as long as they had each other, they would find a way. The room, once filled with the sound of medical machines and hushed voices, now seemed quieter, softer. John leaned back in his chair, his hand gently resting on Max's head. The dog's breathing was steady now, stronger, and John felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to close his eyes, just for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the first time in years that John had felt a true sense of peace. Max was still alive. The bond between them had survived, and that was all that mattered. As John sat there, he thought about all the missions they had completed together, the battles they had fought side by side, and the unspoken understanding they had always shared. The moments of silence between them were never empty. They had always known exactly what the other needed, without words. That was the magic of their connection. Max was no longer just a dog to him. He was a partner, a companion, a symbol of everything that had kept John going all these years. And now, as they both sat there in the quiet room, John knew that no matter what happened next, they had survived the hardest part. Max was going to make it. And for the first time in a long time, John let himself believe in miracles again. Weeks passed, and Max's recovery progressed steadily, but John never let his guard down. Every day, he watched Max closely, monitoring every small change, every movement. The dog's once strong frame had weakened, but his spirit, that unshakable loyalty, had remained intact. Slowly, Max regained his strength. He started moving around more, though still carefully, his legs wobbly at times. John was by his side every step of the way, helping him, encouraging him. They both had a long road ahead, but they were no longer alone in it. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. One afternoon, as John was sitting with Max on the porch of his small cabin, the dog's tail gave a slow wag, just like old times. The sight made John's heart swell with pride. "You're getting stronger, buddy," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Max's amber eyes met his, as though understanding every word. The bond between them had only deepened over the weeks. Max was no longer just his canine partner. He was his best friend, his family, the one constant in John's life. It hadn't been an easy journey, but it had been worth every second. Max gave a small bark, as if to remind John he was still there, still fighting. John smiled and patted Max's head. "You're a fighter, just like me," he whispered. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape. For the first time in a long time, John allowed himself to relax. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. For sure, Max would be with him. Together, they had faced the hardest battle of their lives, and they had come out stronger on the other side. As the evening wore on, John leaned back in his chair, watching the stars slowly appear in the night sky. Max, still by his side, let out a contented sigh, his head resting on John's lap. The weight of the world felt lighter now, the loneliness that had once plagued John no longer a constant companion. In that quiet moment, with Max by his side, John knew that everything would be okay. They had survived, together. And no matter what the future held, John would never let Max go. The two of them had come through the storm, and now, they could finally rest. The days seemed to slip by in a blur, but John never stopped being there for Max. Every day, Max grew stronger, his steps more sure. John could see the spark in Max's eyes, the same spark that had always been there, no matter the odds they faced together. They were both healing, together. Every morning, John would wake up to find Max by his side, ready for the day ahead. The once frail dog was now more alert, his tail wagging with excitement as they went for their walks. It wasn't just about the recovery anymore. It was about rebuilding the trust and bond they had shared for so many years. Each walk was a small victory. John could feel the weight of his own past lifting, piece by piece, as Max continued to improve. The mornings were quiet, peaceful, just the two of them, the sound of Max's paws on the ground, the gentle rustling of the trees in the wind. But one morning, everything shifted. Max started to act differently. He was a little more cautious, a little slower in his movements. John noticed it right away, the slight hesitation in Max's step. "What's going on, buddy?" John asked, crouching down beside Max, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. Max looked up at him with those familiar amber eyes, the trust between them stronger than ever. He gave a low whine, as though trying to tell John something. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Max's energy seemed to ebb and flow, and John couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't the same recovery they'd been through before. This was different, and the worry gnawed at him. He took Max to the vet once again, hoping for some answers. The waiting room felt even longer this time, the silence pressing in on him. He could feel the weight of the unknown, the fear of losing Max again threatening to overwhelm him. When the vet finally came out, her expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "It's not as bad as we thought," she said. "Max is still healing. His body has gone through a lot, and it's just taking longer than expected to adjust." John let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "So it's nothing serious?" he asked, his voice quiet with relief. "No," the vet replied. "He just needs more time. Sometimes, recovery isn't a straight path. But he's a fighter, just like you. He's come so far, and he'll keep getting better." John nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He could feel the tension in his chest ease, the knot of worry unraveling little by little. Max was going to be okay. It might take time, but they had already come through so much. Together, they left the vet's office that day, John feeling a sense of calm he hadn't had in weeks. The road ahead would be long, but he knew they'd walk it side by side, just like always. And no matter what, he would be there for Max, just like Max had always been there for him. As the weeks went on, John could see the changes in Max. The once frail dog, who had struggled just to walk, was now moving with confidence. His steps were steadier, his tail wagging more often. John couldn't help but smile at the sight. They had both come so far, from the uncertainty and fear of Max's initial recovery to this moment of pure strength and companionship. It was as if Max had been given a second chance at life, and John couldn't help but be grateful for it. Every day, Max seemed to grow more energetic, more like the dog John remembered, strong, loyal, and full of life. They continued their routine of early morning walks, the sun just beginning to rise as they walked through the quiet streets. Max's pace was faster now, eager to explore the world around him. John couldn't help but think back to the dark days when he wasn't sure if Max would make it through. How quickly things could change. It was a reminder that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, the love between them was always worth the struggle. One morning, as they walked along their usual path, John noticed something different in the way Max looked at him. The old canine's eyes were bright, full of gratitude and trust. It was a silent moment, but it spoke volumes. Max was not just healing physically, he was healing emotionally as well. The bond between them had always been strong, but now, after everything they had been through together, it felt unbreakable. They sat on a bench overlooking the park, the world around them still waking up. John reached down, running his fingers through Max's fur. The dog rested his head on John's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. It was in these quiet moments that John realized just how much Max had been there for him, how much he had needed him. And now, as Max rested peacefully, John couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace as well. The worries that had weighed on him for so long were starting to fade away. He could see a future with Max, a future full of love, loyalty, and healing. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about living. As the day went on, they returned to their cabin. John made coffee and sat by the window, watching Max curl up by the fireplace. The room was warm, the kind of warmth that only comes from having someone you love by your side. In that moment, John realized that the battle was over. They had both made it through the hardest part, and now they could finally begin to heal together, side by side, as it was always meant to be. Time continued to pass, and with each day, John saw more of the Max he remembered, the dog who had been his shadow, his partner, his rock. Max's steps were no longer hesitant, but purposeful and full of energy. Their morning walks had become a routine again, one that John looked forward to more than anything. They explored the familiar paths, the ones they had walked together all those years ago when everything had seemed so simple. The world was quieter now, more peaceful, but it felt like there was something missing. Max had always been the constant in John's life, through deployments, hardships, and loss. And yet now, the thought of living without him was unthinkable. But as the days turned into weeks and Max continued to improve, John began to feel a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The bond between them had only strengthened, their connection even deeper than before. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the field in front of their cabin, Max sat beside John. The dog's head rested gently on John's knee, his eyes half closed in contentment. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" John whispered softly, his voice full of gratitude. Max lifted his head slightly, his amber eyes meeting John's. The unspoken understanding passed between them, as it always had. They were no longer just two souls trying to survive. They had become a family. John didn't need to say more. Max was there, by his side, just like he had always been. After everything they had been through, this was their peace. The simple moments were now the most precious. Max had become more than just a dog. He was a reminder of everything that mattered. He was loyalty. He was love. He was strength. John had learned so much from him, not just about survival, but about the importance of never giving up, about fighting for the ones you love, about the healing power of time and companionship. It was a quiet evening, just the two of them, and John knew that no matter what the future held, he would always have Max by his side. Together, they had survived the hardest battles, and now, together, they could face whatever came next. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough. John stood at the edge of the porch, the cool evening air brushing against his face. Max was lying beside him, his head resting on the ground, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The day was fading, but the calm between them felt as if time itself had slowed. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt long overdue. John could hear the rustling of the trees, the distant chirp of crickets, and the soft breath of Max beside him. There was no rush anymore, no lingering anxiety over what came next. Life had taken its course, and though there had been many struggles, John felt a deep sense of gratitude for where he was now. He thought back to the day when he first found Max, how uncertain everything had seemed. The war, the struggles, the fear of never knowing if they'd see each other again. And now here they were. Max had fought alongside him, saved him countless times, and now the roles had shifted. It was John's turn to be there for Max, to support him as Max had done for him all those years. Max, the loyal K9, had given him more than just companionship. He had given him a purpose when it seemed like everything else was lost. They had been through so much, and now they were finally at peace. "I'm proud of you, buddy," John said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting John's, as though he understood the weight of the words. John smiled and reached down, stroking Max's fur. The dog's tail gave a small wag, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. It was a bond that had withstood the test of time, of war, of pain. And now, as they both settled into the quiet of the evening, John knew that nothing could ever break that bond. Max had been there through the hardest moments of his life, and now they could just exist together in peace. The sun had set completely now, the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky. The world seemed to hold its breath, the night settling in around them like a soft blanket. John closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the serenity of it all. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe freely again. No more battles, no more uncertainty, just the steady presence of Max beside him. They had made it. Together. And that was all that mattered. The days continued to pass, and life felt like it had finally found a rhythm. John and Max, side by side, settled into a routine of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. John spent more time outdoors, working on small projects around the cabin, while Max happily followed him around, always by his side. The bond between them had grown deeper than ever. Max's health continued to improve, and the spark in his eyes was as bright as it had ever been. Though they both still carried the weight of the past, the days of uncertainty had faded into the distance. The world around them was quiet, yet full of the kind of peace that only time could bring. One afternoon, as they sat together by the fireplace, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow on the room, John found himself reflecting on the journey they had been through. Max lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. John stroked his fur gently, his hand moving with a sense of calm that had eluded him for so long. "You know," John said softly, as if speaking to himself, "I don't think I've ever truly understood what it means to have someone always there. But you, Max, you've been here through it all." Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting John's, the deep understanding between them as strong as ever. John smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never imagined this, never imagined that, after all the years of struggle, of loss, and of fighting for survival, he would end up here, in this quiet place, with his best friend by his side. It had been a long road to get to this point, but every step had been worth it. Max had been his partner, his protector, his companion. And now, after everything, Max was more than just a dog. He was family. John stood up slowly, stretching his legs after sitting for so long. He walked over to the window, looking out at the landscape before him. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the trees and fields. It was a beautiful sight, one that filled him with a sense of peace he had never known before. The world seemed to be at rest, and for the first time in a long time, John felt that he, too, was at rest. "You know, buddy," John said, turning to Max with a grin, "I think we've earned a little peace, don't you think?" Max's tail wagged lightly, his eyes bright with the silent understanding that only they shared. There was no need for words. They both knew the truth. They had made it through the storm, and now they could finally enjoy the calm. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a mutual sense of contentment. John felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet joy that came from knowing he wasn't alone anymore. Max was with him, and that was all he needed. The fire crackled softly in the background as they sat together, side by side, in the quiet of the evening. The days of struggle, of uncertainty, were behind them now. They had each other, and that was enough. As the seasons began to change, John found himself in a place he had never imagined, truly content, truly at peace. The cabin, once just a place to escape to, had become their home, filled with memories of their journey, of struggle, but most importantly, of healing. Max had come so far. The frail, sick dog who had once fought for every breath was now walking with strength, his steps as steady as they had been in the past. Every morning, the two of them walked together, the cool morning air filling their lungs as they took in the beauty of the world around them. The bond they shared had deepened in ways John could never have expected. It was more than companionship, it was a partnership, one that had endured the hardest of times. It had been a journey, one filled with uncertainty and fear, but also with resilience and love. John had often wondered what his life would have been like without Max. In those early days, when Max had been in surgery, when they didn't know if he'd survive, John had felt a kind of hopelessness that he hadn't experienced in years. But now, standing at the edge of the porch, watching Max chase after a butterfly in the warm afternoon sun, John realized something. He wasn't just healing Max, Max was healing him too. The companionship of this loyal dog had brought him back to life, given him a reason to smile again, a reason to believe in the future. Life had been complicated before, filled with endless deployments and battles, both on the field and within himself. But Max had always been there, by his side, unwavering in his loyalty. And now, as they both sat quietly in the fading light of the day, John felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The future, once filled with doubt, now seemed full of possibility. He had Max, and Max had him. The firelight flickered as they sat in the living room that evening, the warmth of the flames matching the warmth that filled John's heart. Max lay at his feet, his eyes closed in a peaceful slumber. John ran his fingers through the dog's fur, a simple, comforting gesture that had become second nature. For a moment, John allowed himself to relax fully, a rare luxury. The days of constant vigilance, of waiting for the next mission or the next crisis, were behind him. He could finally breathe, could finally let go. He knew that Max would always be there, just as he had been when John needed him the most. They had fought together. They had survived together. And now, they would live together. The world outside the cabin had its challenges, of course. There were still uncertainties, still moments of fear that crept in from time to time. But with Max by his side, John felt ready to face whatever came next. He was no longer alone. The quiet evening stretched on, and John felt at peace. In a world that had been so full of chaos, he had found a stillness, a calm that only Max could give him. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing that no matter what happened, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.